Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Just so see a couple more people's audio connecting. But just so you know, we are recording this event today. You will receive access to both today's recording and our recording from earlier in the year, which will be available on our website by Monday. We're going to give a little bit of extra time for Mercury retrograde, so let's give us till Monday, and it should show up on our website. But we are delighted to have you here today. My name is Melissa Howell. I'm the founder of the Diaspora and a proud member of the Arts Alliance of Africa and the Diaspora. If you don't know us, we are a collective that was born out of a growing need to expand the narrative of Africa and its diaspora, and to create a central resource, historical, social, economic, educational resource to ensure the lasting legacy of our cultural institutions, the preservation of our work and our art, while benefiting Black communities around the world. We formed in 2019, and we have been building and thriving and thinking together and supporting each other since then. Our global network of Black arts leaders and organizations has grown to create this sustainable ecosystem that's given us space and capacity to thrive both independently and as a collective. We are a space to incubate and preserve art, both historical and contemporary, and that art particularly created by Black artisans, creatives, and artists. We're a consistent resource to our communities through mutual aid, education, and service delivery. We support the livability of artists, of staff, and of institutions to enable the sustainability of our institutions and our sector, while providing flexible and strategic support to strengthen the organizational capacity of our members. We are gathering data, and we're also designing data about our communities and our work to craft in our own words and under our own terms the narrative of Africa and its diaspora. We are collaborators. We are enabling professional development of emerging artists, Black artists and curators and leaders through standardizing best practices and through skills sharing. And we're creating ultimately this global infrastructure of support that we believe is not only scalable, but sustainable and will live and extend beyond our generation. At this time, I'd like to invite Gigi, who will also a member of the Alliance, to introduce our speaker. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. We are so happy to have you all here. Thank you for that intro, Melissa. I'm very excited to introduce Karen Carter. Karen Carter is the co-founder of Black Artists Network and Dialogue, known as BAND, an organization dedicated to the promotion of Black arts and culture in Canada and abroad. Karen's most recent projects include CART, a Caribbean art gathering connection, connecting artists from the region to the international art world, and the BIPOC Fellowship to help support the development of a more diverse cultural landscape in Canada. We are very excited to have this thought leadership today with Karen, and we open the floor.
How are all of you? I'm looking at the hailing from Nevis, from Lagos. I know there's some folks from the US, some friends and colleagues, so thank you all for taking the time. I'm going to begin by sharing a pre-recorded video, partly because I'm always afraid that the interweb will not be my friend for these talks, and partly because I am not a fan of the watching your face, talking to your face on Zoom. So morning, precious. I'm gonna begin with the video, and then we'll come back and have a conversation. I think it's about 15-20 minutes long, so enjoy and see you soon. Kara Carter here. Really feeling privileged to be a part of the Artists Alliance of Africa and Diaspora, a group founded by Amy Andrieu, brilliant sister who's also CEO of Mokada in Brooklyn, New York. Actually, I think there's a bunch of sites for Mokada, but you know, Amy is next level amazing, and pulled a group of us together during COVID. So part of the process that we're undergoing as a group as we figure out how the structure of organizations that are community-centered doing work in Africa and the diaspora that is helping our artists and cultural workers build careers is to be able to talk about some of the leadership elements, some of the, I guess, principles of thought leadership that we believe will help with best practices for the sector. I'm standing, luckily, in a pop-up gallery space for BAND, which stands for Black Artists Networks in Dialogue, and I'm co-founder and current director of the organization. And when the discussions around thought leadership started, I've been working with the team at BAND on starting to write out some of the principles that impacted our ability to go from a small gallery on Bloor Street in Toronto and an idea before that to where we are now, owning property and looking at starting to build financial models that are more legacy forming, so that long after my existence, we are hopeful that this organization will become an institution, though small in scale, but it'll have longevity. And that principle will be what is fueling my thought leadership talk today. So that said, I'm going to shift to giving you kind of the core overview of the talk. Might walk around a bit because I don't know about you, one of the things I hate about COVID, as much as I love Zoom, is I hate the watching your face in the screen thing, so we tried to do this a bit different. This preview kind of chat will introduce a discussion that will be a bit more call and response. So after you finish this video, I'll be on with colleagues and friends and folks, hopefully, probably globally, based on our network at AAAD, and answer questions and do a bit of a talk back for this overall discussion framework. First core principle I want to hit is the relationship building. The arts has at its core this idea of the relationships you make when you come to see something, as much as it is about the relationships you make when you're trying to create opportunities for a particular event or performance or art experience or talk or book launch, you know, the myriad of things that we do within this creative sector as both presenters and creators. And I think sometimes we forget about how important that thread of relationship is throughout what we do as creatives in the sector, both as the creative minds that work behind the scenes as much as the creatives who are making the work that is presented, or those who work on the creative side as curators that help to support that conversation between what an artist creates and what community consumes or experiences. And so I would say one of the core principles for us has been relationships, relationships, relationships. And the first part is how you secure those relationships. Who do you need to meet to help to get things off the ground or to help to secure your ability to deliver something? How you then keep and build those relationships. So it's one thing to make an introduction and connect to someone, but how you then build those relationships so that they become solidified and become a part of the ongoing ethos of the organization, not only for support that you may get, but also that you recognize you can also bring value to the table, so that it becomes a symbiotic relationships, not just what you're taking from an individual or organization or institution, but how you're able to come to the table knowing that you do have value to bring. And then also to be in a position to share the knowledge about those relationships. One of the key things that I think we're starting to recognize is how we do have information about things that we're starting to understand how we can share that with others. I'll give an example there.
I was lucky enough to be on a board, and this was for an organization that wasn't Black, but I was able to do an introduction that about a year and a half later led to $1 million donation for the organization. And so it's, when I got the call about the fact that this organization secured that money, I was kind of floored, because I didn't think that intro would lead to, frankly, that level of an ask being approved. But it reminded me how important it was to be willing to share the Rolodex, to make introductions, and to do that with an understanding of, you give context, because I made that introduction, but I also gave the person in the organization some context around who this person was based on my understanding that would help them to start to build the relationship. I'm gonna move around a bit so you can see what's in the gallery. The artist Moses, who you'll see here, and the curator Maria, who's down here, but I'm sure Claudia will edit so you can see. I also should, as I'm moving, thank the team at band, Claudia and Natalie, who are helping me with this video, because without them I would be sitting in front of the Zoom very uncomfortably. So I'm standing in front of Sisterhood, Moses' brilliant piece, and this is a Cameroon-born Canadian residing artist that we're excited to be showing in the gallery. So let's go to research and planning. So relationships, how you secure them, how you build them, and to be in a position to be able to share them. And that's just the core of, I think, as African diasporic peoples, the lift as you climb, I think, is a key part of how we need to operate as organizations in our DNA. But the research is key to your understanding first, who are those people or organizations or institutions that are relationships that you want to connect with. And that partly means you understand your own organization's ethos, and it's everything from what you're building, what your dreams are, where you are now and where you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. So starting to do a list based on research to say, who are the individuals, who are the organizations, because sometimes you'll say, I want to have a relationship with this particular institution because I want to have the following outcomes. And so then you understand how to secure the relationship with the individual, which may mean you start to go to events, you introduce yourself, and you start to decode, okay, who's the strategic relationship? I mean, we all wish we had access to the CEOs and, you know, the board chairs for the big machines. You don't always start there. Sometimes you end up starting with someone who is assistant curator or a part-time staff person who can help you get in the door on your way up to building those more senior relationships. So I would say do some research, see where the dots align, but start to be really purposeful around where you give your time, both in the events you attend and even where you volunteer your time. I think I was strategic, I know for myself, around the boards that I sat on, the committees that I did work in order to build a Rolodex of a network that I knew would be really purposeful in helping band grow in the early days. And that Rolodex of network of people became really invaluable as we moved from renting, frankly, to ownership of our property that we own. So research is key, planning is key. And so again, think about, I've done this research and I have this list. And sometimes that research could either be you as a founding director, or it's a team effort with the staff and the board, volunteers, where maybe it's a planning session to say, okay, we want to build this thing, we're here, how do we get to the next steps? And to see if everybody's willing to throw names, organizations in the pool that you think you should be connecting with. I also think it's really important to not forget that again, the lift as you climb principle as you go along is key from beginning to end. Don't necessarily only be thinking about the big machines that are more established, especially because, like it or not, especially for those of us in the West, a lot of those machines are often not centered on Black and African diasporic principles. And so the minute you step into playing with the other, you really have to be secure in your value in order to understand that they may not always understand your value, but at least if you're there, you're understanding why you're there, what's the benefit, and how it is you are using that relationship to forward your own mandate, because frankly, they will use you to forward their mandates. We know this happens, depending on which way the breeze is blowing around things, especially related to equity, access, and inclusion principles. The next piece I'll go to is now the board piece. And this is, again, the idea of the relationship building, the idea of planning and research. All of that feeds into where you are with a board at the beginning and where you are with a board by the time you're at the stage of trying to secure a board that can help you build legacy funding. And I haven't even, I mean, you've probably noticed this, talked specifically about how the relationships, the research, and the board is connected directly to money yet. I'll get there. But as I said at the beginning, the reason for positioning this is for you to understand these, if you connect all of these principles around relationship building, it's as important to meet people that can help you build relationships to get money, and that being the people who work, for instance, in public funding institutions, the people who work in corporate, and the people who work in foundations, or the people who are in a position as individuals to help you fund because they can donate money to you or help to pay for things maybe in kind. Those elements of where people may be is as connected to the relationships and the research, which then fuels into the board. And so by the time those those principles are forging together around how you think about who is in your leadership model at the governance level, you have within your inner sanctum, let's start with your public sector. So every or most major cities across the globe have some element of how you are able to secure funding through public sector. And even if you're not in a city where there's a granting body that is a public funder, like in a local arts council, there usually is elements where you can understand how to secure money federally or internationally, i.e. United Nations or EU funding, especially when you're looking at connections right now for African diasporic people around colonization and how those monies are feeding through international networks. And so understanding the need to know the people who help you, even just to direct you to where that money is such a huge component that we forget. We often, and I think especially in the West, are thinking, where's the corporate money and where's the individual money who can come to me directly, instead of thinking about who are the people who know where some of this other public money is, where it's a matter of if you know you get to write the grant to secure the funding, or that if you secure a residency, maybe through one of these networks, you find out that this residency is actually covered. So you are able to get an in-kind connection instead of a cash connection. Or you end up finding out that that person's knowledge about the public sector funding also is connected to them knowing someone who is a grant writer, that you may not have time to write the grant, but the grant writing comes from that network. So as I said, the reason I position this talk is knowing that if I'm in Canada, or if I'm in a US city, or if I'm in a different city in Europe or the Caribbean, where you get the money may be very different, but the core principles around build the relationships to help you look at these different places to find the money, build in the research and the planning, so that the research and planning goes to opportunity meeting readiness, that if an opportunity comes for funding, you're ready to secure it, be it from public sector, foundation, private individual, or corporate networks. And then the last piece around the board is your board has to be able to assist you either with helping you to write some of the grants that may come through public sector helping you to connect with the networks for individuals and corporate, or helping you with the foundations. And not everybody on the board needs to do everything, but you have to have some component of that. I would honestly say that we own the property we own at BAND because there were board members able to take the meetings with the corporate partner who was, the relationship was shifting from a donation to a possible gift in order to transition from giving us free space for 10 years. And so when that relationship shifted, I wasn't there. I had the relationships with some of the executives that helped us to understand what was going on behind the scene, but it was really important that we showed that there was a team. So that's the reason why a board is so important. Too often, things start with one person's vision, but if you can't get buy-in from others on a board with a range of skills to help execute that vision beyond the one person or 2 or 3 people's idea, you'd never get the credibility within the sector more broadly. So the notion of a team is really important, and that's why building a really strong board is important. We're standing by self-love, another Moses Brilliant piece, which helps to shift my brain to understanding how the board's growth and the organizational growth will eventually lead to the financial stability, which will allow you the dream of well-paid staff who feel like they can stay in the organization and grow, can move from startup roles into leadership roles, and are in a position to be the doers of the day-to-day, and the board shifts from working board to advisory, financial support, and oversight. And that shift goes directly to legacy. And I think sometimes we have no idea. I can say I had no idea how to do that shift. Some of that is what you just live. But I go back again to, if you have built your relationships, if there's research and a plan that's come out of that research, and if you built a working board, you will usually through that working board get a direct thread to how to start hiring staff to release the board from working, because a lot of us as African diaspora people do not necessarily have that legacy of volunteerism at this stage where folks have the money to just pay to play. And a lot of us, as we know, who work in the culture sector, know a lot of these bigger boards are pay to play. And I actually think that's a bit of a gift for us, because we're seeing how that pay to play is getting big institutions in trouble, depending on how people got their money, and frankly, how clean or dirty that money historically or otherwise is. And so for us at this stage to be able to build boards where it's largely a lot of young professionals or mature professionals, you know, those of us in, you know, the 50s and beyond, who are wanting to give back to community, wanting to volunteer, and frankly, learning how arts and culture organizations work so that they're in a position to volunteer on those cultural institution boards down the road. So you get the benefit of being able to help start something up, work to build it, and learn the governance side, which means you're adding that extra layer of developing the board volunteers that are Black, racialized, and are able to represent us on those bigger boards. When you begin that shift, it becomes more important to think about HR skills also being on the board. And that helps with, let's be frank, when you're working the way a lot of us work in small organizations, we can sometimes forget that work-life balance, and can sometimes, whether we, even though we don't mean to, harm folks because things are moving too fast and you're not paying attention to the need to support the individuals that are doing the work. So part of the key, I think, for legacy is really being in a position to have the balance of the right fit of staff you need for what it is you're doing, and that's a fit you can only determine. I can't tell you. I know for us at BAND, we went from, you know, 1 part-time person to being in a position for 2.5 now, and planning hopefully to get to 3 to 5 in the next couple of years. And we think 5 or 6 is probably the sweet spot based on where we're going in the long run. But whatever that size is for you, whatever the dream is, whatever the plan is for that right size, think about having HR skills on the board, because that will help you as you're planning to go forward. I would say legal, HR, and finance are three of the really important skills, especially as you transition and start to think about the financial legacy into operationalizing that so that people are paid well. And this means like beyond a living wage, like pay them competitively so that they want to stay working in our communities and can make a living, have the ability to work at home and abroad, to travel, to do all the things that frankly we see many cultural institutions are able to offer folks in the, I say quote unquote mainstream because we are mainstream, but you know, the non-racialized centered organizations that are out there. The board transition is really key. I'll also say again, just to summarize and recap, the money is connected to all these things. If you don't have these things in place, money will be in front of you and you won't see it and be able to attract it. I was listening to this weird thing, I think, as we all do sometimes on the interweb around, you don't make wealth, you attract wealth. And so if you're operating on these principles, I think you attract wealth because you're presenting a stable, clear model for what you do and the value you bring as an organization to the cultural landscape of wherever you are. And people will find you. The universe will connect you with the right pieces of the puzzle to help you do the work you're doing if you are operating from these core principles. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm standing here in the gallery with a brief intro, probably not necessary because I was referencing the Artists Alliance of African Diaspora, and as you've seen eloquently stated by Melissa, she gave you more detailed background than I would have in this component. The structure of this talk is set up really to give you a sense of how three core components of our work at BAND is connected to relationship building, and that means how you connect with people, build the relationships that allow you to build what you need and to ideally be in a position at a leadership level to then share those relationships with others. So the first component of this talk is really to say, you probably, if you're working in an organization, already have relationships, but sometimes we are in a situation where we take those relationships for granted. And so this is essentially saying, if you have a Rolodex, which most of us do, maybe you want to stop sometimes and take the time to look at those people that are in the Rolodex and start to purposefully ask yourself, who is there, why are they there, and what are the opportunities that you might be missing in your connecting with them. And I came to this when we were in a major shift at BAND, moving from a small gallery on Bloor Street to the property that we now own in downtown Toronto, where we were forced to, and I was forced at the leadership level to have to think about who is in our wheelhouse and how can these people help us move from renting a space to, frankly, being a bit homeless to connecting and owning the space that we're in. So to not be afraid to go through those relationships and to think strategically about who are they, how can they help, what are the asks that you need to be making of them, and how can you, in those asks, also be symbiotic. So what can you offer as you ask? Because sometimes, as we know, especially as community, we are afraid to make an ask because we are not valuing what we're bringing to the table. So whether or not what you bring to the table is something that's immediate as you're making the ask, it's to not undervalue the fact that you're, as a professional in this sector, you're doing great work
And so if you're calling on a colleague to get assistance with something, you actually may be in a position where you can do that same thing for that colleague or friend down the road. And it's also to group those relationships to understand who are just colleagues, who are friends and colleagues, and who are strategic partners that you may not necessarily want to invite them to your house or break bread to them, but this is work. And the fact that I think as culture people, we sometimes muddy the fact that the work we do, we love. And so it's sometimes you end up with relationships that are friendships that is a part of that, but it's being okay with understanding that those relationships do not always have to be friendships. You can be a colleague, you can work with someone strategically as a professional, frankly, as we know they do with you. And often, though, the other outside of African diaspora communities are sometimes much better at this. And so you don't want to fall back to being so strategic that it feels inhumane or unkind, or that you're just using folks, but thinking strategically about the relationships we have, thinking strategically about how it is we put time into building those relationships to solidify them, and ideally thinking about that strategic decision because you want to be in a position to share those relationships, because then the ability to share them is opening up doors for others, or helping with the next generation's ability to help to build or to continue the legacy of what you've built. I think often when people think about money, we forget how important the ability to access funds is connected to relationships. I'll give an example of a board I sat on. It was for an Irish organization. Don't ask me why I was on an Irish organization board, but I was. And the founder asked me at the time I was helping to build this museum concept, and he asked me for an introduction to the chair because he knew that her partner was of Irish descent. Anyways, it ended up that they made a significant six-figure ask and was successful with the ask from that introduction. And so it's, again, being in a position to make an intro, and then being in a position to also give the advice and direction so people understand, if you are going to reach out to this person, here's the things you need to know. So I gave some background so that he would have context on how that relationship needs to be built. And I think it took him about 1.5 years before he called and told me about the support and thanked me for it. And I was shocked, I won't lie, I didn't expect that kind of a ask to come out of what was a simple introduction, but it was just an example of being in a situation, having a relationship, being able to make an intro, being able to give people the right direction with that introduction, and then resulting in financial success. And you want to be on the receiving end of that, right? So you want to be able to, you give to get, right? The universe rewards you when you put things out in the world. So relationships is top of mind. The second thing is, outside of relationships, is to be thinking strategically about how it is that you research and plan. They say that success is always attached to readiness. And I think as we build the relationships, you should be doing the research not only around what your organization's needs are. I think one of the things that I love about AAAD is that it's research-based. We're always thinking about what we're doing as a group, but also looking at what's happening. Even the impetus of our getting together was research that Amy was doing around the sector in order to be in a position to do a call out for this group to connect. So research is key. Never underestimate how important it is to do the research, to understand what's happening in the sector, to understand who the people are that you should be connecting with. And what I do is I research and I make lists. And the relationships may not happen right away, but down the road, I feel like if you make the list and you have a plan, money shows up and you have an opportunity to be able to execute. So you want to be able to build the relationships, but do the research about what are your needs, where are you currently as an organization, and where do you want to be. And some of that people will say to me, that's not research, Karen, that's dreaming. They're in bed together for me. You do the research to connect the big ideas and the big dreams to what would be the possibilities if you had the funds you wanted to secure. So it's really essential to be doing the research to understand who else is out there. And this is about something as simple as check an organization's website to see who the donors are, because then you have a sense of who might be the corporate partners, who are the right persons for you to be able to reach out to. And so if you end up reaching out to someone in a relationship, you've done your homework. So when we first got our introduction to some of the corporate partners we had done the research to understand, oh, these are the banks that are interested in arts and culture. Drill down a little further. These are the banks that are interested in arts and culture and are already supporting Black cultural communities. And drill down a little further. These are the banks interested in culture, supporting Black communities, and are specifically interested in emerging artists or grassroots. They're looking at those of us who are at the in the trenches with community and are interested in supporting projects that are helping with that professional development. And so by the time you're in a situation where you're making an ask, all that research and all that information will influence what you ask for, when you ask for it, and how you approach it. And it allows you to then make that long-term plan around, maybe you're starting with, 10K. The corporate partner we have now that supported us in the house we own, we started out with $10,000 grant from them. But you have the longer term vision for what's possible down the road. And so never underestimate how important it is to have the research and the plan and just have it somewhere, because when the opportunity comes, you're ready, right? So we had the research and the plan. So when we were left the place we had on Bloor Street, ended up in a temporary space with a corporate partner on Queen Street, and they decided to sell that building. We'd done a lease for $10 for 10 years as a corporate donation. Corporate structures internally changed. They decided it was best to sell the property. We then had to look at the reality of, okay, what do we do in this transition? We did some research, called some of the colleagues we knew, people who had ran a corporate strategy for other corporations that size. And they kind of said, if you get about this much, be happy. We didn't anticipate we would get enough to buy property. But again, it was that by the time we were in the meeting with them saying, here's what's possible, we had the information to know how to go in. Because again, sometimes you're like, are we going in Black Lives Matter protest mode? Like, are you going in kind of full guns blazing going, do not ramp with us because we are not here for it? Or are you going in, okay, let's just see what you got. You're holding back and giving them a chance to show up. This was one of those hold back, give them a chance to show up, because we'd had the relationships with an executive that we knew behind the scenes helping the nurse thing. And I wasn't even at that meeting. The relationship was mine, but 2 other board members took that meeting. That is the last piece of this that I'll say, of this 3-parter, which is relationships, building, the research and the planning, and then your board and your staff. If you are in the situation that we were in at Band, where you're starting up and it's basically board led, we were for years working board, doing all the work, volunteering, and then the staff was usually part-time contracts. And we've now gotten to the position where we're in legacy mode, where the funds are such that we're able to build a team and look at helping Black professionals who are working on the business side of the sector develop their careers and train into a leadership levels. You cannot underestimate how important it is to have a really good board. And whether it is a working board that you're starting up or an established board, again, the relationships and the research intersect here with a board where you have to be understanding, are you a board that's just pay to play? Like, do you just want people who have some money and are going to come write checks or bring their friends and deliver money? My understanding from what I know of the sector for Black cultural communities globally is a lot of us are a mix of that. Some people are showing up with money, but some people are showing up with advice, with professional credibility that helps with the money showing up. So for instance, we had the opportunity to work with the Gordon Parks Foundation. And part of that was because of the relationships we'd had with corporate partners, but because we also had a board member, a co-founder, Dr. Julie Crooks, who's now at the AGO, whose PhD in art history, specific to archival photography, just helped to give the credibility that we knew what we were doing and working with that organization. So think about the board, not just from, these are people that support my vision. At some point you have to shift to, what are the skill sets I need? Having the board metrics is essential. And I think for money, having the mix of donor, give, get. I don't go to get off because I don't think that makes sense for us at the community, but the give, get makes sense because even if someone's just giving you $20 a month, it's the principle of you're helping in some way or assisting with fundraising events, which I think is key. I'm going to stop there so that we get a chance to speak with each other. It's 9:30 and I wanted to, clearly my video timing is off, but I also think it's because it started late. So what do I got? 2 more minutes. Anyways, you don't need to keep looking at me. The gorgeous images are from Moses, this brilliant artist who's from Cameroon. I'm going to just fast forward a little bit to see if it takes you. No, it doesn't really. I'm going to stop this and then maybe we can jump to screens where we can see each other. And looking forward to the conversation. Maybe some of you will have challenges for me and say, yeah, I don't really agree with that component, Karen, but please feel free to do so. I'm up for the challenge and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for taking the time this morning to listen to my opinions and experience on how I've navigated this sector and the importance of relationship building, research and planning, and how it is we go about developing our board and move from working boards to staff team. Oh, the one thing I will say before I jump off is we are now actually at Band in a position where we're recruiting a board member who is an investor in order to start with the $5,000-$10,000 that lead to legacy funds. I should say that because I think sometimes we think legacy funding is someone gives us $1 million. Most of the endowments that we see start with small pots of money and grow. So don't feel that you can't just start with a small $5,000 or $10,000 investment and have that grow, because 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, that's how you end up with the millions of dollars in endowments that allow your organization to be able to pull from them in perpetuity. So we are at that legacy planning phase now.
I wanted to ask a question, if that's okay, that kind of builds on the space of the Alliance and this idea of creating new narratives. Karen, can you share a little bit about how the storytelling has evolved? Maybe some of your experiences of whether they've been pitches or presentations that didn't land so well, but can you just tell a little bit about how the narrative around Band may have shifted in different contexts around your fundraising strategy over time?
Good question. Thank you for that. You're right, it has shifted. I think in the beginning, the narrative was we're trying to build something and we don't have all of it figured out. We know there's a gap in the sector. So when Band started, there were things like the NIA Center or the Wild Seed Center, which is an organization that is formed around the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. And actually they go back early, as we know, Black Lives Matter goes back earlier, the spike as we saw with the murder of Mr. Floyd. So we have had a significant shift from the story of help us fill a gap in the cultural sector, help us fill a gap in the representation of Black voices. What we always said was the diversity of Black voices, because we intersected the representational element to also underscore that Blackness is not a monolith, and that we were needing this arts organization because we also wanted to represent African diasporic people and Indigenous Africans from the continent who were living in Canada and didn't know they were Black till they got to this side of the world. And so that was kind of the beginning. And then from there, we shifted when we were in the situation of having our own space to, we need the space for a safe gathering, to gather without explanation or permission, and to just be, so that we were not just an arts organization that was utilizing the other space. And then every time we entered the other space, we had to constantly justify our reasons for being there. I think we hear this from artists and cultural workers all the time, that it's cool to work with institutions that are established and quote unquote mainstream. I hate that word because I think we are mainstream. We drive mainstream. But I know you know the reason for my inverted commas. But that notion of being in their spaces, even when they invite you in, and it's like, you invited me in, you're not even prepared for me to be here and just be. So you invited me in, and now you want to morph into something. And so that story became a core part of, I think, the transition into space, where people are like, you just started. Why do you need space? Because we literally did our first gathering event in 2009. And by 2010, we were in space. We were on Bloor Street. We had a storefront space. And people are like, how do you pull this off? And also, why would you risk everything this quickly? And it was like, so we can gather and plot and plan and not have to explain ourselves to anybody. So you can just show up and be whoever you want to be. If you don't want to be Black and you just want to be Nigerian, you can be that, because in your core, that's who you are. Or you want to be, you know, the artist that doesn't feel like you have to lead with your Blackness. So we shifted from help us gather, help us make this an opportunity because it's an important gap in the sector in Canada and definitely in Toronto, to we need space for the safety of gathering on our own terms, and to now being in a situation where we want legacy. We want to make sure that the next generation of Black cultural leadership can run. We want to make sure, although people say it's crass when I say this, but Buzzfeed, to me, if my maker comes for me tomorrow, I don't want band to be in jeopardy, because we've seen that, right? Leadership at a particular level, particular skills, and they leave, and then there isn't the ability for something to last. So you're correct that the story has shifted. And in each shift, you then would position what the resources and what the knowledge and what you were bringing to the table, and why it was important for a corporate partner or individual to support you. And I think at each thread, we always knew our value. We're still in the position where sometimes we're emailing people saying, this might not be a good fit. And that's okay. Like, we prefer to not take your money than to take your money and twist ourselves into a pretzel. And then we're tormented and you're unhappy. And interestingly enough, every time you say that, they find a way to get you the money, because they feel like, oh, you know your worth? Know your worth. Yeah.
Karen, I have a question. We have some people who are joining us who are artists, right? So they're not an organization, and you kind of talked about 3 approaches: relationship, research and plan, and you're boarding your staff. But you work with a lot of artists. So how would you kind of reframe this for an artist who's like, okay, well, I'm trying to go out for funding. I'm trying to be a little bit more stable. I'm trying to build out my studio. Can you maybe shed some light on that, but for an artist?
I'd say the principles around relationship and planning still make sense for an artist, especially if you're an artist whose cultural practice is one that is at its core collaborative. And I think a lot of African diasporic artists that I've met, they're interested in that collaboration. So if you are in a position where you can build relationships that assist your practice, either because you're collaborating with another artist or cultural worker or curator to do something, or because you're interested in residencies. I mean, I think Gigi's reference in my bio to the work we're doing in the Caribbean is literally that each one teach one element. It's that if we network and if we meet each other, what are the doors that might open? Precious Lavelle's on this call. And she was amazingly gracious when we were in Jamaica in 2020 in introducing Katrina Coombs, a textile artist in Kingston, Jamaica, to a residency in Brazil. And so that introduction, that connection, that knowledge sharing is the core of why relationships are important for artists. Because what happens, I think, with artists is that intersection then usually leads to the funding. So Katrina told us about the opportunity Precious presented. She applied and she called, needed some assistance with the funding, and we were able to assist to make sure that her flight was covered to get there, because they covered everything except travel. So the money shows up, I think, if you have the relationships and you've done the research. I think for artists, the research is about either their practice. I know artists, I think we all do, who work pours out of them. They get up every day and they make work because they have to, and it pours out of them like, you know, a running tap. Oh, Katrina's on this call too. Hey, Katrina, me putting your business out on the street. I hope that's okay. And thanks for the support. Um, uh, but then you also have artists who research and plan what they're doing, right? And so whether the research is about your practice or the research is about what do you want to do next, who are the folks you need to meet, should you go to this gallery opening, should you be talking to somebody about where you can get studio space to share? I think the research and planning is core for an artist, and I think obviously the notion of a board for an artist is more if you choose to or if you're in a position to, because I know it's not necessarily a choice, but if you're in a position to scale up, to have a studio and to have your team, it's who's that team who's behind you. And so for them, it's the team could be who's your representation. As we've seen, a lot of Black artists are walking away from representation because they're like, I'm doing all this work and you're taking half of my money. So it's like, be really careful about who it is that represents you. And also I've been saying to most artists, because I've heard this from, the whitest of white dealers, don't sign anything. If you want to work with a dealer, it's a handshake. And while you're both happy, you stay. And if you're not happy, then you can walk away. And I think a lot of artists are still signing things in their first, second, third year out of school, fresh, trying to figure their way. And people are seeing their brilliance and seeing the long term and trying to lock them into 3 or 5 year deals. So the board is, for me, with artists, is about your representation, your team, who's replying to your emails or taking your calls, who's out there helping to chase work down for you. But yeah, it's the first two, I think the principles are similar, only it's about either making work or access to opportunities that might lead to your ability to make work. And also, again, the money, the sales of your work, how that's decided, the relationships, and all of those things, all those threads will impact the price points you have if you're selling work, or the commissions you get. But some of that is about being ready for all of that if it comes your way. I mean, I know artists who were not ready to sell their work. They made a body of work, it was personal to them, didn't want to sell it. And you can choose to hold on to it, but if you have bills to pay, you have to decide, if I'm holding this, why am I holding it? And if I'm selling this, why am I selling it? And that I don't underprice, because I find a lot of African diasporic artists are still undervaluing their work.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Gigi, and she's saying, can you talk a little bit more about C art? Or Gigi, if you want to explain that more, if you want to talk more about C art.
Well, you did a little bit, Karen, but just.
Is that okay?
Yeah. In 2022, I had a chance to actually participate. And I would love for anyone who doesn't know about the wonderful work that you're doing in Jamaica, throughout the Caribbean, and connecting, if you could just tell us just a little bit more. And hi, Precious.
Frankly, I think a lot of us are trying to figure out, where are you going to be? I'm rolling into my mid-50s. And then you start thinking you've rolled up this hill, and as you roll down it, where you want to be. And knowing I don't want to be in Canada all the time. And the Canadian snowbird concept was usually Florida, but I'm not a snowbird, and that was not going to be the place that I would spend winters. And I also wanted the flexibility, as a lot of us have seen. And I knew this even before we saw the rise of Zoom and this type of ability to connect globally. Like, I've seen people hailing here from Nigeria. Like, we can connect with each other in such a broad global way now electronically, but it's still so nice to physically gather and to create opportunities for that. So it started from a selfish place of watching what I think is a hyper rise of African artists, like African indigenous artists, on the arts landscape globally, and then watching the Caribbean artists kind of lagging, and then watching the conversations in the UK in particular around Windrush, kind of almost making this assumption that the Black arts movement in the UK was a representation of the Black arts movement for Caribbean artists globally, and that there was this spike. And I feel like it was very particular to a British experience. And then thinking about Canada and just looking at, okay, the indigenous Africans who are in Canada, there's that clear thread connecting. And so for those of us with the Caribbean, it's kind of this triad of where you are, likely in the Americas or Europe, and then the Caribbean and the continent, if you've done the research around your history. So I just wanted to do what I could from the network I have. I'm blessed to have met people globally and have some great, brilliant, smart people. And I thought, what if we just gathered in Jamaica, because that's where I have access. And then invited other artists from the region to connect and did some networking, what would happen. So we'll keep trying. We're in the process, I didn't mention, of doing a renovation at Band. And so that may push the gathering to 2025 instead of 2024, but it really is rooted in helping helping African diasporic artists in the Caribbean who want to stay home and work, but still be connected to the global art market and not feel like they have to leave the region in order to have a career. Because that brain drain, we saw it happen to our parents and sometimes our parents' parents, and it's not it doesn't help the region's growth. And yeah, that's kind of the impetus behind it. Yes, the Maroon Connections in Nova Scotia. Hello, Shelley.
So you mentioned like your kind of how your narrative changed with Band, and you're doing so much, like, you know, you're doing lots of different things. You just talked about the Caribbean, you're doing some stuff that you're about to do on the continent. How do you scale up with your funders and the people you're talking to? Because you started out with, hey, Band, we're doing this, now we're relocating, and that's the narrative they know. And then they're like, well, what are you doing in Jamaica? What are you doing in Africa? How does that relate? And now you want more money. So can you talk about that idea of like scaling your vision, and how do you bring your board and your funders along?
You're right there that and I don't know about the others of you, but I always feel like wherever I am isn't where my brain is focused. Wherever I am that's done, and my brain is in the next phase. Like I know Melissa's the diascope is that's how your brain works, and I don't have your MBA-ness. So I'm flattered that you're nodding. But just if you're in a place, then it's like, okay, what's next, and how do you push to that next place? So again, for me, those three core things around the relationships, and the reason the relationships is at the top of that list is because it's so key. Because you end up where you build over the years trust and credibility with those relationships, and you can almost get away with testing anything. You throw stuff at the wall and they'll come with you because they've seen you deliver, and they've seen the impact of what you've delivered, that it is what you say it is, right? And I say what you say it is because if what you say you want to do is build community, then they have to see you're building community. If what you say as an individual artist is that you want to build your practice to deliver on a project, they need to see the outcome of that project. And so it's whatever it is, wherever you're at, you just got to deliver on what you tell people you're going to do. Because if you deliver on that, they will continue to come with you. There's that principle that you hear business people say, success begot success. People like to see things work, and it doesn't mean things don't work. There's a whole bunch of things that have not worked for me, but those are my lessons. I don't necessarily spotlight them for everybody. And if I spotlight them, I'm strategic when I spotlight them on who. So I have repeatedly told young arts professionals about me getting my first arts management job as someone's assistant. I was a disaster. I was a horrible assistant. And I think Claudia might already be on this call, and she can tell you, Karen's a hot, disorganized mess. She cannot assist anybody. She needs to be handled. And so the team that I work with now, no, there's 400 things going on in my head. And usually sometimes they're like, stop, focus in this direction. Or other times I make myself stop. Thus, the 7 days in Jamaica right now, where the first couple of days in Mobe was like sun and sitting and writing stuff down, to then loop back to say, okay, this is where this is at. This is where this is at. You have to follow up on this. But most of us are so busy, you're like this, and you don't have the time to stop always. So having people around you to say stop and direct you is key. But definitely what you show those relationships, again, these are not, so let me back up a thought. I had said at the beginning that some of these relationships become friends and colleagues. Some of them just are colleagues, and some of them are just strategic. You have to be really careful about the friends and colleagues ones, because sometimes as those shift, you have to be careful how your narrative and what you communicate to them shifts, because you're still, the collegial part of it means if they're more your friend than your colleague. I had someone I would consider a colleague more than a friend took a job outside of Toronto in 2020. It wasn't a strategic job, it was a panic job. I took the job because I was worried. And that's the other thing that I would say is, if you're a creative, trusting your spirit to make your decisions and not your fear is so important, because every time I've done something out of fear, it's a disaster. And if I breathe and make the decision because it feels like the right thing to do, even if I don't know where the resources are coming from, it works out. So that's another little bit. But this person who I would have thought was a colleague called me when my life blew up, created a job for me, and caught me because of that history of credibility. And when I realized what they had done, because it was about 6 months in, and I thought, this isn't a real job, there's nothing here to do. And I kept looking for stuff to do and thinking, this is foolishness. And then I felt guilty because I would go to them and say, I can't take your money to do nothing. There isn't a real job here. And they said to me, Karen, you know, those MacArthur Genius Awards, I think you're that smart. So just take the money, take the year, figure yourself out. So it's that kind of credibility. And saying it now almost brings me to tears, because it's that idea of you deliver, you build the relationships, and they show up for you when you need them to, even when you don't, even when you may not have expected them to show up in that way. It's just, you gotta, and if you're doing things from the right place in your heart, and sometimes people you think would show up don't, and it's the ones that are like watching you quietly, watching the work you're doing, and watching that you're doing it from the right place. Yeah, it's a blessing. Sorry. One of you needs to talk.
It is a blessing. It is a blessing. We do know that. And you are worthy of all the tears and all the flowers, because we know what this work is like, whether we have started this work as a creative, whether we have come into the work as an administrative, or both. There are many of us that navigate this space as a creative, but also administrative. And so we are so thankful that you were able to share just a little bit of your story and a little bit of what keeps you going. One thing that I'd like to say that you've mentioned quite a bit is connecting to your spirit, that space in which is pushing you and guiding you, but then also you feel afraid, right? Because it's not necessarily, the road is not necessarily like everyone else's. But we do know, as Black and Brown people, we do know that our road is different, and we know that it is special. And I think what's important that I've heard, and I'd love to hear from everyone else before we go, is just how important it is to build your community, to have people that you trust, that can guide you and support you when you're doing well, but also can check you and also can say, hey, you might want to consider this,
True.
Yeah.
I think people, and I've said this, like when people said, oh, what's this thing about talking about money? They thought it was going to be, here's the list, here's the banks, here's the, part of that is it's impossible because there's a global audience here. I mean, there's people from all over the world. So your bank in Nigeria that might be the right fit may not be my bank in Canada or someone else's bank in the US, or the individual donor, again, may not be the same person. But for me, those principles of the relationships, because the relationships will be what you go to. But in the case of this memory, for me, the relationships are also what carry you, right? And so there are people out there who are wealthy and who are interested in impacting lives in good ways, and want to know the person the funds is going to, and want to see the impact. And so I think if you're building relationships in the right way, and you're going to lose some, like I'll also be honest about that, the relationships that I've lost because we shifted band in a particular way, or the work I did, or sometimes they just don't come through because they're busy. When we launched the art in Jamaica, one of the reasons I thought it was tenable in the plan I had in my head was Scotiabank as a bank started in the Caribbean. So, and I knew the executives knew that. So they were, some of those relationships that helped us in Canada might help us in Jamaica. And I mean, I got the call and the apology saying, sorry, I was busy. I didn't follow through on the thing I told you I'd follow through with. And I was just like, it's okay, it'll work out down the road. And since then, there's some things that have happened with the person who's in charge of Scotiabank's art collection, being a young brother in Jamaica, and just connecting those dots and then following through in different ways. But yeah, sometimes the relationships pay in dividends because you're thinking about. I mean, I think some of us saw this during the George Floyd thing. You also want to work with good people, right? Like, you want to get the support, but you also don't want to get the money from someone who's up to horrible, nefarious things. So that's why the relationship's also important. It's that you're also there, they can check you, but you're also aware of who is this person, what are they up to, or who is this company, what is the company up to, and is this a company I want associated with my brand?
Great. So we have about 4 minutes left. I don't know if anybody in the audience wants to has any questions or thoughts. The chat has been really, really great. And the feedback, everyone loves you, Karen. They're just like in the chat, just giving you all your flowers. But yeah, please, we've all been just talking ourselves as people, the coordinators of this. But we'd love to hear from you who are joining us. If you have anything to say or share, here's your moment. Put your virtual hand up, and you're definitely welcome.
Well, I don't know if I could put my hand up. This is Precious, but I do want to say, hey, Karen. I'm very touched by looking at this screen because of Karen. I met Shelly, I met Gigi, Katrina, and it's all because of the way Karen connects people. It's really, really impressive. I tell her all the time, I think I wrote in the comments, she's a force. She has something very special, and she is so sincere in everything that she does to connect people, but also to help you become the best that you can be. And so I just want to give her, as you say, her flowers, because it's really important, and it's a very, very, very special skill that I haven't seen in a lot of people. And Shelly, I was doing some research in Canada this summer through BAND, and Shelly just, met me spur of the moment and just gave me all this information and, about what I was researching. And it was just so special to just people, she calls people and they respond. Karen calls people and they respond because of who she is and how she performs. That's all I want to say. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Precious. Just will say that project, the research was funded through AAAD. So there's a mini report for you, Amy.
Amazing. So I think we are going to close at this juncture. I don't know if anyone, Amy, you want to say anything? Not putting anyone on the spot. Melissa, anyone want to close out? Gigi?
Well, I definitely want to say something. I just want to say, one, everything that we have shared here, we are so thankful to have the audience, folks that are coming in from all over the world, and just want to give thanks to Karen for the work that she's doing and what she shared with us. But really, if you could heard all that she said, we'd know that there's a million things that are unsaid. And more than anything, as a member of the community and having gotten to know Karen first virtually for a couple of years, and just meeting her in Jamaica, the desire to go and meet her in Jamaica was the magic that I saw, and that I from her work, from her dedication, and from her commitment. And so I just would like to say that we're giving you virtual flowers, but in this moment, we just want to say thank you, and thank you for continuing on and believing in this work.
Yeah, I just will say thank you all for the opportunity to share some of that knowledge that I have. And also, obviously, I am because of who you are. Like, I don't get to do this work without the community that supports, and the people who show up for me, and the people who've opened their Rolodexes for me and shared their networks for me. Like this, it's a gratefulness for everything that is poured into me, that there's a responsibility to pour back. So I thank you all for the opportunity, definitely for the team at AAAD for allowing me this platform, and for Amy for the brilliant leadership in pulling us all together. Thank you all very much.
And please, please, please follow Karen's work. You can follow her on social media at Casey in Toronto. Is that you everywhere?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's me everywhere. But follow us, follow all of us.
And
all
band,
of
yeah,
the
follow
team.
everybody. But just because you're speaking and you dropped so much, you gave so much amazing information, people need to learn more about your work and continue to support your work. So you can also do that at Black Art in Dialogue on all social platforms. I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Yeah, and I will quickly say that reach out directly if you need more specific information about something, because it was very general. But if you need something else, if you message me on Instagram or one of the other platforms, but Instagram's the most active one, I will follow up if I can help.
I would like to say, I don't know if hello, my name is Dr. Ya Elambe. Gigi invited me. I just want to say, keep raising up so you could get your blessing down.
Amen.
Ashe.
Thanks to everyone for joining today. If you would like to get more information about the Alliance and the work that we are doing as a collective, please do find us on social media at AA Africa Diaspora. Our website is artsalliancead.org. We appreciate having everyone here today. Our virtual doors are opening and we will be continuing to grow and welcoming in new membership over the next year. So we hope that you do continue to join us for these conversations, for this space. And we look forward to catching you in the future for one of our next events. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Karen, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.